All right, here we go with 11.2, sans calculators. That means you cannot use one. So, as I said on RenWeb, there's probably going to be some tears. I'm very sorry, but you have to know how to do this without a calculator. So I'm going to go through it very slowly. It is tedious, but you do need to know how to do it the long way, and it does help strengthen your multiplication skills, which have probably gotten lax in the last couple of chapters as we've been using calculators. So here we go. In this lesson, we are not dealing with perfect squares anymore. So instead of seeing problems like the square root of 64, which is so easy, you're going to see problems like the square root of 65, and you're going to have to approximate. Knowing that it's very close to 8, you're going to have to see if it's 8.1 or 8.2, and that's where all of the multiplication comes in, okay? So I'm going to just work through example 1. However, I think I will just use the problem that they did so that we can kind of stay on the same page and you can see it printed out as well as on my board, okay? So the directions for example 1 say, approximate the square root of 7. Again, not a perfect square. I don't think you're going to see a single perfect square in this lesson. To the nearest whole number. Now this part is easy because all you have to do is figure out what the two perfect squares are around 7. And so the one on the less side is the square root of 4. And on the high side is the square root of 9. Okay? So, which one is closer to 7? 9 is closer to 7. And so you would say that the square root of 7 is about, that's why this doesn't look like an equal sign. It's wavy. And you would say it is about 3. Okay? Now, I'm going to come back to that. When we get to guided practice, you'll have to do that a few more times. But the harder part is approximating square roots to the nearest 10th point a number, okay? So we'll just keep on working with the 7. And in order to approximate to the nearest 10th, you have to approximate to the nearest whole number first. So we will keep coming back to this exercise in each of the ones that we do, okay? So we know that 2 point something isn't like 2.0, of course, will not be right because that would be the square root of 4. It could be 2.1, it could be 2.2, we don't know. And so we're going to have to do a lot of multiplication on a scratch piece of paper, okay? Let me say this to you though. Because we approximated that it's closer to the square root of 9, because 7 is closer to 9 than it is to 4, I recommend that you either work backwards, so you know it's not as high as 3, so you might start by squaring 2.9, or you might jump, and there is no science to this, so you're just going to have to decide where do you want to guess that it might be, okay? I'm going to guess 2.7 squared, okay? So you might be wondering, why in the world is she writing all these goofy decimal numbers over here to the side? It's because 3 is the nearest whole number, but they're asking us to approximate it to the nearest 10th. And because we cannot use a calculator, we have to pick out the tenths places that it could be, okay? And I was explaining to you that we know it's not going to be 2.1 or 2.2 because we're not getting close enough to a 3, okay? So I'm just going to start. I'm going to show you what you need to do to figure this out. So I'm going to square 2.7. And here is where your multiplication skills will get honed, will get sharpened, okay? And here's where I will probably make mistakes. So just multiplying this out, we get 7.29. I'm going to put that over here on my little scratch pad, okay? So if I were to guess that the square root of 7 is 2.7, approximately, these should be wavy, I'm actually too high still. I'm trying to get as close to 7, and I might end up at like 6.9, okay? So there's no need to do 2.8 or 2.9 because that's going to get me further away from 7. So I'm going to keep going down. I'm going to now try 2.6 squared, all right? And so when you work out this multiplication, you get 6.76, okay? Again, I'm going to ask the question, just like I did over here, which is closer to 7, okay? And it was 9. I'm now going to say which of these two squares is closer to 7. Well, 0.76 is 24 hundredths away. This is 29 hundredths away. And so I'm going to say that the square root of 7 approximated to the nearest tenth is 2.6 because it is closer. Now, that is worked out on page 582 in example 2, and you can see their little scratch pad off to the side. They squared 2.9 and just went down. Hopefully you'll get kind of used to this and you'll be able to guess better at where you should start, but there's no reason you can't start higher. Okay, so now it's just working through these and seeing what we come up with, okay? All right, example 3 on page 583 says, a doctor studies the motion of animals. He has found that the maximum speed s, which is going to be in feet per second, that an animal can walk is s equals 5.66 times, because it's bumped into it, the square root of L, where L is the animal's leg length in feet. What is the maximum walking speed for a giraffe with a leg length of 7 feet? So I'm going to put the 7 inside of my radical sign, okay? Oh, good news. Look at the solution. You can use the approximation of the square root of 7 from example 2. I will say this. While you're working through 11.2, don't throw anything away, okay? Because things like this will come up, okay? I worked through the problems probably last week, and I just had papers all over the place. Some of them are tucked away in here because I wanted to refer to them as I was teaching you. So keep all your little scratch multiplications, okay? Since you can't use a calculator, there's no need for you to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. So I would not throw anything away, and I would be organized. I would number, okay, I'm working out number 1, and then hopefully later you can go back and say, oh, I already worked out these squares, okay? And that's what's happening in example 3. We can look back at example 2. We already approximated that the square root of 7 to the nearest tenth was 2.6. So all I have to do now is multiply 5.66 to 2.6. Now remember, in multiplication of decimals, you do not have to line them up. So I'm going to just multiply this out. And it's 3 decimal points over. And it says that we want, did it say, it didn't tell you in this one to round, did it? But anyway, they rounded their answer up to the nearest whole number, and they said that the giraffe's maximum walking speed is about 15 feet per second. Okay, so that is just another example of things you will be called on to do. Now, you might not be ready for this. You might want to pause maybe after one or two, but now I'm going to move into guided practice. If you think you can do number one, pause the video and try it out. You might want to stay with me through one, maybe two, and then try 3 and 4 on your own. But hopefully by number 4, you can solve it on your own before you see what I'm doing. All right, number 1 on guided practice. We have to approximate the square roots to the nearest whole number and then to the nearest tenth. This is how it's done. So first of all, to the nearest whole number, the easy part, okay? The smaller perfect square, less than 10, is 9, and the one over 10 is 16. Obviously, 9 is closer to 10, so the whole number will be 3. And then we have to figure out to the nearest tenth. Well, we're only 1 off from the perfect square of 9, okay? So I'm going to start my scratch work at 3.1, all right? And again, just working out the multiplication. And I came up with 9.61. So off to the side, I'm going to keep my little notes, my little chart. I want to see if I can get closer, so I'm going to try 3.2 squared. And I jumped all the way up to 12.64. That seems weird. So I'm going to double check my math that we jumped 3 whole points with 1/10. So 6, 4, 12. Oh, here's where I messed up. I multiplied. I hope you already caught that. All right, so this is 10.24. Remember, if your answer doesn't make sense, you probably did something wrong and you should go back and check. I've mentioned that to you many times. Okay, so we're done with number 1. We just have to figure out which one's closer. This one's 24 hundredths off of 10, and this one is 39 hundredths off. So I'm going to approximate my answer to the nearest tenth at 3.2. All right. I think we have time for one more. So I'm going to give you the answers to 2 and 3. All right. I'm running out of time on the video. When you approximate number 2, you should get 5 and 4.7. And number 3, you should get 7 and 6.7. And I'm going to start number 4 here. I'm afraid I'm going to run out of time. So we'll see what happens. You have to do the square root of 115. So I'm just going to do the whole number on this video. You might remember, hopefully you do remember, that yesterday I told you to have a list of perfect squares up to 25. You might want to have that list handy. It will keep you from having to do a ton more multiplication today. But you should know that 115 falls between the square root of 100 and the square root of 121. It is closer to 121, and so the whole number will be 11. And in part 2 of this video, I will remind you of how to approximate this one to the nearest tenth.